Hello, sir, and welcome to the Masculine Tribe podcast, where I ask the questions that help you identify, cultivate, and apply principles of masculinity. I'm your host, Todd Michael. Today we explore how valor is a principle of masculinity, and how being more courageous will efficiently increase masculinity in any man. I'm glad you're here. What is the most courageous thing you've ever done? I don't mean the thing that other people would see and think, oh man, that took some guts. Those are often superficial acts of implied physical danger that don't actually pose a high likelihood of harm. Think skydiving or base jumping, for example. I also don't mean actions that combine bravery with a healthy dose of recklessness, like riding a motorcycle without protective gear or punching the school bully in the nose, for example. Those have elements of bravery, but it's all too often mixed with self-loathing and a general, I don't care what happens to me mindset. When I ask what the most courageous thing you've ever done is, I'm talking about the thing that you personally feared the most intensely, but you faced squarely anyway. Was it physically scary, emotionally scary, or both? How old were you when you first became aware of your fear of it? How long did it take for you to decide to face it? Hours? Days? Months? Years? Decades? How many attempts did it take before you faced it head on? What was the outcome? I wish I had time and ability to listen to each one of your answers to those questions, and I invite you to send me a message or share them with someone you trust if you feel so inclined. For me, these are easy questions to answer in my mind, although challenging to articulate to others. I'll come back to my answers in a moment, but sticking with your answers, I want you to think about what it was that gave you the courage to face that fear, despite it being so strong. Where did you find your valor? Before we go any further, I want to be very clear regarding a subject about which I am very passionate: stolen valor, or the act of falsely claiming military service, rank, or decorations. While using the word valor is certainly not any of these things, I want to point out that the valor of which I am speaking here, as it relates to masculinity, is not intended to cheapen the valor required to go into battle. I highly respect the men and women who choose to serve in our armed forces and would never intentionally do anything to disrespect them and their willingness to sacrifice and serve. That being said, when I use the word valor, I do so very intentionally. I want to elicit a stronger form of bravery than simply jumping off a cliff into a deep lake or skydiving with a backup parachute. I use it to mean courage and facing danger, but we know that there are many forms of danger, or, more specifically, perceived danger that men face and avoid. When we are willing to face all forms of perceived danger, and all fears, especially those that are primarily mental and emotional in nature, that is the kind of valor that cultivates masculinity. A lot of men would rather face physical danger than emotional. Perhaps it's in our DNA. Perhaps it's a cultural construct. At the end of the day, the why really doesn't matter. But sometimes the first stop to cultivating your own valor is being willing to admit what actually scares you. Where is the valor, after all, in facing a thing that you had no inclination of avoiding? When I handle spiders with my bare hands or empty rat traps, there are some who would say they could never. I have never feared these things, however, so am I any more brave than they are? I don't think so. I'm not afraid of anything, you may hear a man say. But in some cases, is he truly unafraid? Or is he so emotionally numb from years of avoiding acknowledging his emotional scars that he no longer cares what happens to him? Is he brave or hopeless? To get at the root of valor, you have to first get at the root of what you fear, and that will almost always be directly linked to what you avoid. Perhaps it's a tough conversation with someone you love. Perhaps it's admitting to a weakness or addiction. Perhaps it's owning a past failure. Maybe you fear commitment because you actually fear letting someone close enough to have to face the possibility of losing them. You might be afraid of trying because failure seems too large a price to pay before you can succeed. Or maybe you are mentally and emotionally repressing some past abuse or other traumatic experience that seems easier to run from than to deal with and process. Whatever your veritable Goliath, I am here to tell you that denial is no solution, and is a pretty terrible stone to attempt to sling in his direction as you turn to run away. Squarely facing your fears, your pain, your sorrow, your vices, your demons will suck for a season, but many a masculine man of principle will attest to the reality that it will allow you to come back even stronger, more free, and more capable of taking on the challenges you will face. Now for my answer. The thing I feared more than anything was speaking to my own father. One grown man speaking to another doesn't sound so scary, does it? Let me share with you some context. I was raised by my mom, and until my adult life, all I knew of my father was his name, a few of his hobbies, and that he wasn't interested in raising a family when he and my mom found out that she was pregnant with me. I had never met or heard from him until I found him and my half-siblings while in my 20s. The full account of how I tracked him down and the initial response from that side of my family is a story for another time, but suffice it to say for our purposes here, it took years of knowing how to contact him before I was ready to do so. After finding him, I had emailed with him a bit for a few years, but had never spoken with him on the phone or face to face. When I tried to articulate why speaking to him became something I feared, I had to pass through a few layers of denial before I settled on the real answer. At first, I thought it was because I was angry with him and feared I would lay into him too harshly. That was just an excuse. I then reasoned that it must be that I was too hurt by his abandonment, and I was afraid I would break down emotionally upon hearing him speak. That turned out to be only part of the answer. After years of struggling with why I had avoided it, the realization came that the reason why I so deeply feared speaking to him was because I was afraid it would take away my favorite excuse. Not having a dad had served as a convenient crutch to avoid doing so many other scary things. How could I play organized sports, after all, without a dad or any brothers in the home to teach me? Why didn't I choose a more challenging major in college? I didn't have a dad to push me to be more practical, is what I told myself. Heck, even the very way that I spoke and words that I used, which happened to be very flamboyant, were all his fault. I had no ownership in any of it. Do these lies I told myself sound very convincing to you? They no longer do to me either, but boy did I let them fool me for decades because of how much more comfy it felt. Letting go of my favorite excuse was at once terrifying and liberating. When I ultimately did speak with him in early 2021, I felt as if all that time and energy invested in avoiding and fearing that moment had been utterly wasted. I had built him up to be my Goliath, but in fact, he was a simple old man who had no more influence over my life than a stranger. I didn't have him to blame for anything, and I didn't have him to thank for anything. It was, after all, not about him. All of my problems had actually been me problems, and for the first time in over 3 decades, I finally felt like I had the clarity of mind to get to work solving them. No excuses, just honest ownership. That, my brothers, is where I found my valor, and I invite you to do whatever it takes to cultivate yours. If you recognize that the world needs more masculine men, and that facing your fears with valor is the start to becoming a more capable man, head on over to masculinetribe.com and join the tribe today. We need you, and we want to help you become the man you know you were meant to be. Until next time, gents, take courage and be masculine.